Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us. Fascinating session we've got here. We're going to be looking at how you create and drive social value and wider ESG as part of that, particularly in a city context. Thank you to everybody who's joining us on demand here, live from EXPO Real. We're going to start first of all, Brigitte, with just a brief introduction from you, picking up how Redevco do that, and then we'll pick that up wider with the panel as well. So over to you, Brigitte.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Yes, creating and driving social value in the city. We are all working in the real estate industry, I would guess, but in fact, of course, we are working in the social industry. As I learned a long time ago, ladies and gentlemen, we are not working in the weather protection industry. It's much more than that. So what we are trying to do, we try to make places people really love. And I strongly believe that a place without a social value doesn't have a future value and therefore doesn't have an economic value. And the economic value is still equally important, so we're trying to find the right balance between purpose and profit. People, planet, profits, always been important, but now we realize it's not a nice to have, it's really a need to have. The world population is growing, and it will grow until 9.7 billion in 2050, and 70% of those people are going to live in cities. So how can we make cities people love to be, people like to be? At the same time, we have to avoid urban sprawl, because it's not only the cities we have to take care of, it's also the nature that's going to be so much more important. We are part of nature, and we're only just starting to realize that. I was on a conference a month ago, and it was about the real estate business in California, and I found out that the real estate in California, you can't take insurance anymore on real estate, on new projects. So they say there's so much fear for flooding, for fires, for earthquake, that we're not able to do insurance anymore. Well, that does mean something, of course. So in this environment, we have to operate. Biodiversity. Anyone looked into biodiversity as a topic recently? That's really scary. It's really scary. All scientists approve that it's only will take us 10 more years, and then we have to solve the problem on biodiversity, because there's something like a tipping point. And when we are over this tipping point, we can't do anything about it anymore. Then we're all gonna die. So I don't know why everyone's still talking, but that's what's going to happen. 40% of the buildings we need in 2050 already exists. So we have to make sure that we really use those buildings at the best. How can we do that? Redevco is trying to find out, because we have these beautiful assets in the cities, how can we really work on these buildings and use them as much and as on the best way as possible. And we had a very nice workshop with young people, and we asked these people, what can we do on our buildings? So we said, these are these beautiful old department stores at the Rue de Rivoli on Oxford Street. What can we do with these buildings? And these young people, they came up with solutions to make sure there's no vacancy anymore. And we said, vacancy? Did I mention vacancy? These buildings are not vacant. And then the young people said, well, they are vacant during the night and in the evening. Then, oh, okay, so we can do something about it. We can use these buildings better. And then I'm biased, I'm working in the commercial real estate. I thought, oh, then we can maybe have double our tenants and we get double profit on this building. And the young people said, when we use it also with other people, then you only all have to pay half of it. So that's a good insight. Looking at it in a different way, and we should. Redevco fundamentally believes in cities, and we have this beautiful heritage of all these old department stores. But how are we going to be sure that we take all the right decisions and use these buildings as good as possible from an ESG point of view? For example, in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands, we have this big box at the high street, 11 stories. That sounds a lot because it's also underground, but beautiful, beautiful building. And we decided not to rent it out on retail, but really make it a field lab and try everything we know about the future of retail and the future of high streets. And we are going to measure it to see how we can create a place people love, create a place very much on health and well-being, and then start trying to measure if it really is going to have an impact on the surrounding. And maybe that is the way to make these places better. Yes, and then only one thing I really would like to discuss on this panel, because if you are going to be a landlord like that, and you are going to be much more on mixed use and really trying to find out what's the best for a building, then it's also changing the role from landlord to tenant. When you're in the social business, I really believe that it's getting much more operational and you will get much more involved in what the tenant is doing. So how can we make that better together with the occupiers of the building and work together on the E, the S and the G? I would very much like to hear the opinion on the panel on this, Richard.
In order to do that, we will need to bring them up. So if you could come up, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really, really interesting topic around this, and a big focus as well for the industry. And I'm really delighted to have such a range of different perspectives on the panel, because I think that's also one of the ways we're actually going to solve some of these issues is by collaborating and by working together in order to make that work.
Yeah.
We already know you, Brigitte, so I'm going to start with Ben.
Yes.
Just a quick 30 seconds on who you are and what you do so that then everybody knows where we are. Ben.
Yeah, hi. Ben Sanderson from Aviva Investors. We're a pan-European real assets investment manager, investing 50 billion sterling of capital, and I look after the real estate equity and the infrastructure equity part of the business.
Super. Savinch.
Thank you. Do you hear me? It's okay?
Yeah.
I'm Savinch. I'm working at the Paris Region Economic Development Agency, and we are promoting the Paris region as a place to be, to live, and to establish the company. So I'm the head of clean tech and the smart cities.
Super. Andrea.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. I'm an independent politician at the City of London Corporation, where I chair the investment committee. The portfolio, including property and financial investments, is roughly around $7.5 billion. Impact is a big theme for us, whether it's environmental, social, or governance. So being on this panel is a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Christiana.
Thank you. Good afternoon from my side as well. Thank you very much. My name is Christiane Konrad. I'm a partner at PwC, based in Frankfurt, and I lead the global real estate ESG practice, which we started to build 4 years ago. It's an interdisciplinary team focusing on ESG strategy implementation, and I'm also really, I'm passionate about ESG. I work in this area in the built environment for more than 12 years now. And what we see right now is so many requests by authorities, governments, also from the Middle East, Asia Pacific, asking us if we can support them to define their ESG strategy and implement them in urban city planning. So I'm really keen on the insights my panelists have to share. Thank you.
Great. And thanks very much for joining us. And if you've got any thoughts that you want to contribute or questions, do. It's a nice intimate space here, so that gives us that opportunity. I wanted to just kick off in terms of, I guess, you know, we're talking here about creating, driving social value as part of ESG in cities. But my guess is that it may mean different things to different people. So let's start with the investor perspective, maybe with you, Ben, just in terms of, I guess, how you see that from an investor point of view.
Yeah, so there's two aspects to that question. The first is how we kind of think about it philosophically, and the second is what we're doing about it, I guess. Certainly from a philosophical point of view, we very strongly believe that those investors who don't consider social value and don't think about it as part of their sustainability approach and their approach from an investment point of view will underperform. And we're unambiguous about that understanding social value, understanding the impact of your investment and the place around it is an important part of your investment process. So that's certainly very much how we feel about philosophically about our investment process, and how we do that in the same way as we think about energy use intensive and carbon use intensive from an environmental perspective. We developed a social value framework that applies to every investment we make. Different categories relate to different investments, but they're things like the impact on employment, the impact on income levels, the impact on the broader community, impact on diversity and inclusion of the investments we make. Now, hard to measure for sure, but that's the framework we develop, which will in time apply to every single investment we make.
Interesting, and I'll come to measurement in a minute, because I think that's a really important point as well. Savish and Andrea, let's just pick up with you, maybe with you first, Savish, just in terms of the city perspective on that. When you're talking about it, does it mean the same thing as it means for Ben and Brigitte? How do you see it from a city perspective?
You're coming to me?
I'm coming to whoever wants to speak.
I'm quite happy to take it. So more along the lines of where Ben's coming from. So social value, you know, by its definition, is getting that financial and non-financial return by institutions on a daily basis, right? Whether it's looking after the health and well-being of the communities, whether it's generating social capital, or whether it's the environment. And at the city, that is massive for us. So for example, when we look at our new Museum for London that we have coming up in the City of London, you know, a big part of that is giving back through culture, through the arts. And in case of the new one, when it's completed, it will be free to the public. Right? So that's one example. Another example is when we are looking at affordable housing, right? That's massive, which when it comes in, because what that will then do, it has the knock-on effect of removing overcrowding and rough sleeping. That's a social impact, right? And then we just submitted some draft plans, some thinking to Parliament, where we're looking at how we utilize our space, where we're taking the inside of an office outside. And that's in response to COVID, which, as we know, has changed the way in which how we work. On the environmental side, when we look at it, we've got this new agreement where more than half of our electricity is coming from a solar farm, right, which is reducing our cost by 3 million. So that's kind of 4 broad examples over there where the city are massive supporters of this, and we are in line with the UK's government thinking of getting to net zero by 2050, but a little bit more ambitious. Of course, we are the City of London, right? So our target is 2040, but with our own projects, 2027. So we are ambitious. We'd like to think there's some best practice out there, but at the same time, there's learning, because we're going to make mistakes. When you're the first mover, you're going to make mistakes, and that's where I think the learning comes in as well.
Okay, great. Savish, from your point of view, are there different perspectives or additional perspectives in terms of how you're seeing it there from Paris?
Yeah, so I'm representing the Paris region, which is 12.5 million of inhabitants, and which is a territory that where there is increasing population every year. We welcome 45,000 people every year in this territory. So we have the most populated area. And today, for the government of Paris region that I'm representing, I'm not having the same point of view of an investor. Designing the city is a political arbitration. And I have numerous challenges in this territory in terms of housing, in terms of economic activity, because I have to provide economic activity to these 12.5 million of inhabitants. And climate change, of course, because having 40 degrees Celsius every summer will become normal. And we have to give a quality of life to all the citizens, otherwise they will leave, and we are a capital territory, and we have to keep this leadership. Otherwise, they will live in the other region of France. So political arbitration means that we have to hear the citizen perspective. So what the citizen is telling to us, because the citizen is voting for the government, the citizen is telling us that he wants affordable cost housing. He wants spaces, which can be a bit a problem in Paris, spacious spaces, proximity to nature. And he also wants, in Paris, to be able to walk in the street, to let the children run in the street. He wants also access to the public transportation, etc., etc. So we have to deal with that, and we have to construct the city according to that. And we have to combine the economic development needs that is very important for us, for our sovereignty, and all the things related to people well-being. So how we work and how we handle that in different ways. So we have an objective of rebalancing the density of the territory. 12 million of inhabitants, it's spread unevenly. So today we really construct an infrastructure of a rail, which we call Grand Paris Express, and which will be 200 kilometers of lines. And we have this objective to make the 50 minutes concept city, where from one station you can reach your job, your work, the medicine, the hospital, etc. So, which is very important. We also have a big work on the public spaces, which serves as area for urban socialization. Very important. Pedestrian roads. You don't consider it as an activity, but it's also a kind of activity for elderly people, for human, and activity sport is good for the quality of life. Greening the city, of course, remains biodiversity. You say it, Birgit. It's very important, and we believe that nature is a passport to fight against the urban disease, for instance, the stress. And the last one, we learn also from our experiences, and before we used to create monopolistic real estate use concentrated on tertiary or commercial activity, and now we come back to that and we say, okay, we want mixed city. We want to re-put the human in the center of the city, so it will be our work.
Okay, good. Very interesting, and I'll pick some of those up in terms of the mixed use. Also interesting elements that we may be, are coming up a lot more in terms of the real estate side, particularly when we're looking at things like senior housing, healthcare, elderly care, concepts around how do you, as part of the real estate sector, try and tackle loneliness? Yep. How do you make those connections? How do you build community? So new and different and interesting things. And that was very interesting, I think, that point about making the streets safer and the roles that potentially, the investors can have in that in terms of the sort of real estate that there is and how that's connected. Yep. Christiana, you're talking to both cities and to investors. So it'd be interesting to get your perspectives, I guess, on those two different perspectives as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe two comments. First one, I like many things, all the things you said, Birgit, so thank you for the introductory speak. And I really agree, real estate is a social industry. And if we all know the numbers. We are responsible for 40% of the global CO2 emissions. We are responsible for 50% of the amount of global waste. And in developed countries, people spend more than 90% of their lifetime inside of buildings. So there is a huge impact of real estate. And I think that's something we should keep in mind, and also both sides, investors and governance authorities, are aware of that. And the second one is really, really important when we speak about the S in ESG, and looking at the methodology and how the ESG transformation started like 30 years ago with the Club of Rome. The S is as important as the G. And it's really, it's just a bit more difficult to measure. And it's not scientific based, it's stakeholder based. So the methodology is different. But we all need a balanced approach on the E and the S. And you cannot support, for example, the environment by putting solar panels on your roof and don't look at the supply chain and how employers are being treated in the supply chain. So this all needs balance. On the other hand, you cannot do a social project on social housing, for example, and not look at environmental standards in that. So it's really about two perspectives, looking at the S. So first one is the social impact as main investment target, as project target, is the first one. And the second one is about social minimum requirements, for example, in duty of care, supply chain requirements. And looking at the regulator is pushing more requirements for both perspectives.
Okay, good. I'd be interested, both Brigitte and Ben as well, to get your reflections on what's come from London and Paris, in a way, from Adrian, and just how does that fit in to what you're aiming to do? And just on a kind of separate point is, as investors, are you looking at this with a certain amount of knowledge that that's either going to reduce returns, or do you see it as something which actually ultimately over a period of time is going to support returns?
Yeah. Well, we strongly believe it will be better when you have attention to the E and the S. So it's still very difficult to prove that about the future value of buildings. But when you put it against doing nothing, then we all feel that we have this brown discount and the green premium. So in the end, we strongly believe that it will help us to make the buildings better and therefore also have a better value. And when I hear all the initiatives taken by the municipality, well, that's wonderful. When we all can work together on, for instance, the 50-minute city, and as an investment company, you can look at your buildings and make it much more mixed use and much more affordable or attainable for a different group, that it's more a vibrant place to make. In the end, this vibrant asset, well prepared for the E and the S, will in the end have a higher value than just operating as normal.
Yeah, I would agree with that completely. And I think one of the big challenges is that partnership and that integration of any single investment with everything else that's going on. I mean, every real estate investment we make is throwing a pebble into a pond and the ripples go out. And we all know that every investment we make has an impact on the community. Our job is to make sure those impacts are really positive rather than negative.
Yeah.
But also what we're trying to do as well is to bring the power of a bigger organisation and an organisation that invests in both debt and equity and in real estate and infrastructure together, because that's how you solve the problem in the round. And that means also working with city regions and local and national governments to solve these problems. So an example of that is, for example, if you had a housing development with no infrastructure or transport connectivity, or if you had a housing development that just catered for one particular sort of occupier, the social value will be affected. And to your point, Richard, about value, the long-term value of that asset will be affected. Whereas if you develop a more integrated social community, intergenerational, higher and lower incomes, you get maximum social value. You also have a diversity of income, which benefits investment.
Yep.
And then if you combine that with good transport infrastructure too, and the support of the city region government, you've got a very, very good long-term investment. So that's an example, in my opinion, about how social value is at the very heart of investment value, positive social impacts, positive investment returns over the long term, and that's what we're really trying to achieve.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And you mentioned there about how that's kind of coordinated in a way. And I'd be interested to know, from everybody's perspective really, in terms of the challenges, obviously often, Aviva may have this plot here, Redevco may have a plot here.
Yeah.
So actually the nature of commercial real estate investment tends to be that it's separate areas for separate people. Does that make it difficult to add social value? And does that make it difficult as well for a city, because you've got to deal with ultimately a number of different people to try to achieve what you want to achieve?
I personally, I think it does make it difficult. I think we've all seen, really good real estate buildings, but they are not integrated with the building next door because of a different ownership, and that's that's what's happened in the past. I think that's the nature of the partnerships, both investors looking at things through the same lens, for example, Aviva and Redevco, but also it's working with local and regional government and with a framework that everyone understands to ensure that, for example, the social value is maximised by, for example, the right balance of monitoring income profiles, the right social value, the right green space, or whatever it might be. So what's the phrase that English people use? No man is an island. No man or woman is an island.
Yeah.
We all know that. That's the nature of real estate. It cannot operate independently.
Yeah, and I think it's a non-competitive subject.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we all agree that it's so much better if we work together, and because then when you look at a picture like that and you see the green buildings, when you ask people how would you foresee a beautiful future-proof cities, they come up with these ideas. So we all agree on this.
Yeah.
So what's keeping us from making it together?
So that's a nice way for me to come in. So how do we do it, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we do in the city is what's called BIDs, Business Improvement Districts. And these BIDs have been set up, I think we have about half a dozen or so, where it's the sponsors, if you want to call them that, are the businesses within that area. So Allgate, for example, there's the EC bid, and you get big businesses from there who sponsor towards it, who help then move the subject matter forward. But the key word over here is collaboration. But this is where the municipalities come in, right? So in this case, the City of London, we help facilitate the creation of those bids to then make it happen.
Yeah.
And Christiana, it might be interesting because we were in Singapore last year looking at some of the biodiversity there and how that was being integrated into cities. Very different to what we see in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. But biodiversity is moving up on the agenda in Europe as well. So I'm happy to say we published our biodiversity study this morning, and I managed it. And it's really one of the it's one of the biggest crises. It's connected to climate change, and we won't manage the climate crisis without managing the biodiversity crisis. And there's so many small things you can already do increasing the level of biodiversity, and they're also cheap. They save you costs. When it's about like green facades help you with the cooling, that's what we saw really impressive in Singapore. It's also about increasing health and well-being, noise reduction, air ventilation. And you said what I really like is, of course, we need a trial and error approach to all of it. And it's about collaboration. And looking at social and also at biodiversity, I think the next hashtag is connectivity. So you need a connection between ecosystems, but also from a social perspective. Connections, collaboration of communities only works if over the real estate you can have a connectivity of different stakeholder groups.
Yeah.
And that's
I read about a very nice example in London that they are now trying to make these stepping stones, as they called it, so connect the parks via the roofs of buildings, so that it's 100 meter, tiny green roofs connecting the buildings to help on the biodiversity. Well, that can be a first step to connect the investors also and the municipality. So maybe a good thing comes out of it.
Ron, you had a question that you... There's not a microphone, so you'll just have to be...
Shout out.
Shout out, yeah.
I like the discussion about value creation. But similar like the environmental, do we have a split incentive problem in terms of who is investing in the beginning of the value chain where you see the valuation of the end? So what's the biggest challenge maybe also to do it? My opinion is it's about the split incentive issue where in terms of where we can create value for something different than where we invest in the beginning. So how do we measure and also where do we see the valuation of the effect? So how can we create this alignment in the value chain? That's my simple question.
Yeah, so I think that's a really important point. I guess if you take the example of that challenge from a environmental sustainability point of view, where we've seen that being an issue, and my view is it's less of an issue now because we've seen that valuation impact start to be put into appraisals for development, start to be into appraisals for existing assets. So I think that where we've seen, and when we've seen fundamental changes in the behaviour of valuers from a sustainability, environmental sustainability point of view, and that allows and encourages and forces investors like us to underwrite differently, put capital into environmental strategies, brown to green, etc., as well as new developments. So my perspective is we need that valuation shift to happen, and I think investors will drive that, but also the valuation industry will evolve as well. So I think given the journey we're on, we're not far from that. And if I think about, for example, when you're trying to underwrite a new development, I think unless you consider the social value and you consider some of the things the panel have talked about, I think your long-term value won't work and therefore the investment won't stack up. So I think we're on a journey with social value in the similar ways we were with environmental impact. And I think we're accelerating fast. And so that issue will begin to disappear quite quickly, I think.
Yeah, so from an investor's perspective, right, to me it's a balance. So when we're sitting there as a committee and we're making a decision, it's a balance. And it comes back to what are your investment beliefs, right? So you having a pot of money, deciding what are my beliefs. So you'll have some financial beliefs, you'll have some non-financial beliefs. The social value, to me, in the past few years, has been sitting in that non-financial beliefs. But I think it's slowly making the link to the financial beliefs. So let me give you a few examples. So, all of us had to go through COVID. When we look at our equity market, where we had monies in responsible investing funds, those funds have decreased in value, right? For the various reasons that's been discussed. You flip that, so you take that same COVID example and you look at the property market, right? So us as a landlord, one of the bigger landlords in the city, we switched to turnover rents. Massive impact. That helped us retain our tenants, right? It gave them the flexibility, knowing that if their rents go down, if their turnover goes down, the amount that they pay us in rents goes down as well. That's a massive social impact. Coming out of that now, we now have green leases for our buildings as well. So I've purposefully given you two examples, one on the equity side, where the values got down, but then one on the property side, where it's gone up. So to me, you take it back as an investor to what are your investment beliefs. How you then come about it with financial and non-financial is a combination for your portfolio as a whole. And you got to believe that not at all times everything's going to go up. Ben, that's your point about diversification. And not at all time everything's going to go down. So it's balance.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Do you think we are therefore seeing a change driven by social value and environmental issues to the nature of the investment returns from real estate? Because I think we've seen this in the lease length shortening, but almost the lock it away, long income dominated return with less capital volatility was always one of the traditional reasons to invest in real estate. It feels like the equity risk, income risk balance is shifting, and investors have got to accept that real estate gives you a different sort of return. So I'm answering my question really, but do you think that's happening?
So you've used a keyword there, traditional, right? This is the City of London Corporation, the oldest running continuous democratic institution in the world. Our assets have been in the portfolio 400, 500, 600 years. So that traditional belief, I would say, is still there. We believe in property as an asset class. We believe it will turn over. But just because we have that belief it doesn't mean we should stay still. You do a review. Is it working? Is that balance between the two working? And it's funny you say that, Ben, because that's exactly what we're doing at the minute. We are looking at that balance between the two.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
No, really interesting. And just in terms of the social value side, Ben and also Brigitte, plainly a lot of standing assets are there where you're having to try to re-engineer social value into the project.
Yeah.
And there are lots of very interesting ones around biodiversity that I've seen across Europe as well, and actually elements where social impact has been created without actually a huge amount of cost, interestingly, being put in, but just a different way of thinking or a different innovation. So it would be interesting, I guess, just to get your perspective on how much of that is retrofitting, if you like, and how much of that is now being built in when you're actually thinking about a project that you're going to change, or, you know, either in your case, Brigitte, something that is going to be transformed, and maybe something new or transformed for you, Ben.
Shall I start?
You can start.
Well, maybe again on this project we are now just launched last week in Rotterdam, OX, this big building, and we really see it as a experiment. So we are going to do everything on health and well-being. We will try to find tenants who also believe in health and well-being, very much on inclusive and diverse and fair, a fair business proposition. So not a classic a lease contract, but really work together to see what's best for you, what's best for us, how can we work together on this. And we're trying to monitor everything we find out on this experiment and see how it influences not only our building, but also the surrounding of this building. So we will be in contact with the other users in the surrounding of this building and see if we really can reinvent the high street and what the high street can add to a livable city. So it's, and maybe in the end it's not that different because it's still a building with tenants and customers come in and so how can you really make it better without doing everything new? It's not a real new business model. They still have to pay rent, but how can you do it in a better way, in a more constructive way? And we think in the end it will pay out, but we will see.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Yes. Social value in your existing assets can be a challenge, not least because of the lack of a consistent kind of measurement framework. And so there's a bit of marking your own homework goes on, I think, with existing assets, in that investors like us and others will kind of do a study of the social impact of their existing investments and almost do it ex post to say, you know, I generate this many jobs, incomes rose by this much in the local community, income inequality improved or whatever. But it tends to be quite selective if you're not careful, and this is the problem. And so where we need to get to, whereas I think what a lot of investors are doing, and we're certainly trying to do, is be a little more strategic in new investments and to be really independent in our underwriting of that investment from an investment return and social value perspective. And the holy grail is not to take forward an investment that has negative social value or doesn't enhance social value. Where we need to get to, and this is where we're converging on from an environmental perspective in a measurement sense, is a lot more commonly accepted environmental measurement metrics, not that they're entirely consistent, but a lot more consistency of that. In the same way we made a journey in performance measurement as an industry in the last 30 years, we need to get to that place from a social value perspective whereby everyone on this panel and everyone in the whole of Munich Expo is using broadly the same measures of social value, and therefore we can assess, you know, our third-party investors can assess how good Redevco are versus Aviva Investors because there's a broadly accepted measure of social value. That's where we need to get to, rather than, as can happen, not anyone on this panel, but could happen, where you cherry pick the measures you like. So a more consistent approach is where we need to get to.
And then maybe it's not the perfect way to measure it for your company, but it's so much better that we have a common understanding to talk about this.
If I just come in on 2 points that have been mentioned. So I think when it comes to existing buildings, retrofitting does have a place for it, and we have started doing that with the with the city's portfolio, and we are seeing financial rewards coming through from it. But with developers and redevelopment, you can bring in things via policies as well. So a couple of things that we've brought in at the City of London is when someone's putting in for a planning application, they've got to show whole life carbon cycle optioneering. So you've got to give us a few options to show that that's going down. Something else that we put in as part of Destination City, as part of the planning application, you should show that you're giving back something to the society. Is it some retail offering? Is it some leisure offering? Is it some green space? Is it just open space for entrepreneurs who only need to use, a small room for a couple of hours a day? So that's part of the process as well in us assessing it.
Yeah.
That's the first point. The second point on reporting, and I won't spend too long on this, some of you might be aware, and this will help on the social side, right? Because it's a problem. The FCA and the PRA have just done a consultation. The consultation's out specifically on ED&I within that. And ED&I is a big element of social reporting. So it'll be interesting to see what the regulators in the UK are doing on this, following the response to that consultation. I will not be surprised if some metrics come out like they did with TCFD. So something similar on the social side.
That's going to help.
Yeah.
And of course, Christiana, big focus as well on upcoming regulatory changes around the social side from Europe as well.
Exactly. So I think, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So looking again at the social minimum safeguards, we see very strict requirements there on the duty of care supply chain requirements. We see like a competition between the regulators for higher standards. So also some damaged person might be entitled to claim against companies in Germany or in Europe to pay some damages for infringements of human rights in the supply chain. So this is being pushed very hard by the regulator. And then in terms of social investment targets, project targets, the social taxonomy is under development. It will follow the same methodology as the environmental taxonomy when it comes to the order you look at the different requirements, but it will have a stakeholder approach. So, and that's really, really key. Also what we're discussing here, you always need to look at the specific stakeholders. Giving value back to the society, you need to look at the stakeholders. You mentioned the tenants, and I really like that perspective. You're also speaking about value increase. It's so the first studies looking at the value of ESG of green buildings, like the M&G study. It said already a couple of years ago that you have a more stable environment where you have sustainable buildings. So and there you have longer leases, you have a better relationship with your tenants, and that's something I think is really, really key.
Yeah.
Great. We are at the end of our time, but there is 10 minutes left before the next session starts, which means that if there were questions you were burning to ask, but either didn't want to ask them in public, or I've just cut you off from asking them, then you can feel free to pick that up with the speakers afterwards. Just in terms of our sessions, you may be interested to know as well that there's quite a big focus on ESG, social impact, senior living, healthcare tomorrow, and towards the end of the day we'll have a session at 5, which is looking at implementing ESG and social impact strategies, and Martijn here will also be on that, so thank you for joining this one as well to pick up on some of the points, because I will want to take what we've said here through into that, and we'll also report on all of this in the next issue of Impact, because from our perspective as publishers, whilst normally I would sit with an editorial hat which would say, well, I'm just going to look at the market and think about the pros and the cons. In this particular case, this is about driving forward change. So Impact is about bringing together the cities, bringing together the investors, and actually facilitating and driving forward change. So thank you very much to everybody for being here. Thank you to the speakers for being part of that journey. And if you could join us in thanking yourselves and everyone for being here, including all of the people watching on demand at home as part of our program for Live at EXPO Real. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.